Jason and Lily Mercer were the kind of couple everyone in Ashcroft admired. Young, quiet, dependable. But when they vanished without a trace, what followed wasn't just a murder investigation. It was a descent into something so horrifying, so impossible that even seasoned detectives refused to believe it. What was found in the woods changed everything. It began with an ordinary Monday morning in Ashcroft, the kind that slipped by unnoticed in a town where not much ever happened. Jason and Lily Mercer hadn't shown up to work, which wasn't like them. Jason was a mechanic at the only garage in town, and Lily worked part-time at the library. Both were known for being punctual, dependable, and quiet. When they didn't call or show up, their bosses weren't alarmed at first. Maybe car trouble, maybe a family emergency. But by Wednesday, when neither of them had been seen or heard from, concern began to grow. A co-worker drove by their rental house, a modest 2-bedroom on the edge of town, surrounded by trees and backed by miles of thick forest. Their car was parked in the driveway. The front porch light was on, though the sun was already high. No one answered the door. Everything looked undisturbed, untouched, almost staged. The police were called late that afternoon. Officer Denise Rayner arrived. First, she expected to find the couple inside, perhaps sick or avoiding calls. But when she knocked and received no answer, she tried the door. It was locked. She walked the perimeter of the house. No broken windows, no signs of forced entry. All the curtains were drawn tight. With a warrant secured the next morning, officers entered the home. What they found was strange, not violent, not chaotic, just off. The living room was clean, too clean, like it had been recently wiped down. There were 2 mugs in the sink, both rinsed. A book lay open on the coffee table, its spine flat. Upstairs, the bed was made with hospital corners. A phone charger still clung to the wall socket, but there was no sign of Jason or Lily. Not a single item out of place. No struggle, no hurried exit. Nothing was missing. Not wallets, not shoes, not their dog, which sat quietly in the corner of the living room. The dog was healthy, but skittish, and had clearly not been outside for days. Animal control was called to remove it. Then they opened the fridge. Inside, among containers of leftovers and expired milk, was something that shouldn't have been there. A note, folded neatly and tucked into a plastic sandwich bag, sat on the top shelf. There was no writing, no ink, no message, but the inside of the bag was smeared with something unmistakably red. Blood. The detectives were baffled. There were no fingerprints on the bag, no traceable DNA beyond the smear, no signs that anyone else had been in the house. Jason and Lily had vanished into thin air. At first, officers theorized they had staged their own disappearance, but there was no evidence of packing, no credit card use, no withdrawals from their bank account. They hadn't taken their car. Their phones had stopped pinging 3 days earlier and were now completely dead. As the sun set on that quiet neighborhood, no one knew what had happened to Jason and Lily Mercer. But everyone felt it. Something terrible had begun. And the worst part was, no one could explain why it felt so intentional. 7 days passed with no sign of Jason and Lily Mercer. Their disappearance had already begun to stir whispers around town. Rumors of cults, secret affairs, and hidden debts swirled like autumn leaves. But without evidence or leads, the case stalled. Then a call came in from a man named Earl Tennyson, a retired game warden who lived just a few miles from the Mercers' home. He had been walking his hunting trail early that morning when he caught a terrible smell drifting through the trees, sharp, rotting, and unmistakably wrong. Earl knew what death smelled like. He marked the spot and returned later with a deputy. leading them into the dense woods with his old dog trotting beside him. About 300 yards from the trail, partially buried beneath a tangle of dead branches and leaves, they found 2 black trash bags. One was split open near the top, revealing something pale and unnatural poking out from within. When the forensic team arrived, the bags were carefully opened. Inside were dismembered human remains, limbs, torsos, and fragments of tissue, wrapped in layers of plastic wrap and duct tape. The smell was overpowering. Despite the decomposition, the bodies had been handled with eerie precision. The cuts were clean, deliberate, almost surgical. There were no signs of tearing or trauma, no broken bones from blunt force. Whoever had done this knew what they were doing. The remains were transported to the state medical examiner's office, where DNA analysis confirmed what many feared. They belonged to Jason and Lily Mercer. But something about the findings unsettled the medical team. Both bodies had been completely drained of blood. Not a drop remained in the tissue, vessels, or cavities. Yet no blood had been found at the Mercer home, or anywhere near the burial site. It was as if their blood had simply vanished. Even more bizarre, there was no evidence of internal damage that would explain how the blood was removed. No puncture marks, no incisions on major arteries, no signs of bleeding out. The blood was just gone. The examiner noted that while the cuts to dismember the bodies were meticulous, they had not been made by industrial equipment. They were too clean, too fast, as if done with an impossibly sharp instrument wielded by a steady, practiced hand. As news of the discovery reached the public, panic set in. Ashcroft, once a town of sleepy peace, now felt watched. Doors were double locked, kids were kept indoors, and whispers of something evil in the woods began to grow louder. Reporters tried to press the police for updates, but officials remained tight-lipped. Privately, several officers had already admitted they were deeply disturbed by the case, some even requesting reassignment. The forest behind the Mercer property was cordoned off, but people swore they heard strange sounds at night, high-pitched, tones like whistling and low rustling even when the wind was still. No one wanted to walk those woods anymore. Whatever had taken Jason and Lily hadn't just ended their lives. It had introduced a presence into the town that couldn't be seen, but couldn't be denied. Something had changed, and it felt like only the beginning. The case of Jason and Lily. Mercer was growing colder by the week, but the sense of dread in Ashcroft only deepened. With no suspects, no clear cause of death, and no known motive, the investigation had hit a wall. Then, during a routine evidence cataloguing session at the Ashcroft Police Department, a junior technician made a discovery that reignited the entire case. While reviewing items collected from the Mercer home, the technician noticed something odd about the master bedroom closet. Tucked behind a false panel near the floor was a hidden compartment. Inside, covered in dust and wrapped in a faded scarf, was a leather-bound journal. The initials LM were embossed on the front in gold. It was Lily Mercer's personal diary, something no one had realized was missing. The journal's early entries were unremarkable. Lily wrote about ordinary things, dinner recipes, new books, weather complaints, and notes about her shifts at the library. She mentioned Jason frequently, how he'd been staying late at the garage, how they were saving up to move into a larger place, how they'd adopted the dog from a nearby shelter. Everything was simple, domestic, and peaceful. But about 6 weeks before their disappearance, the entries took a sudden, unsettling turn. Lily began writing about strange occurrences around their property. At first, she thought animals were rummaging through their trash, but the bins remained sealed. She described waking up to a tapping sound on the window, only to find nothing there. Jason brushed it off as wind or branches, but Lily was unconvinced. One night, she wrote about hearing soft, rhythmic whistling coming from the forest. It would always start just after midnight and end just before dawn. They checked outside with a flashlight. Nothing. Over time, the journal grew darker. Lily described a growing sense of unease, a feeling that something was watching them from the trees. She began to suffer from vivid nightmares, waking up in the woods, unable to move, while a tall figure stood over her. Jason reportedly started waking up with small cuts on his arms and back, as though scratched by fingernails or thorns, even though their sheets were clean and the dog never slept. In their bed, then came the mention of a figure. Lily described seeing someone, or something, standing at the tree line one evening, just past sunset. It was tall, thin, and motionless. She couldn't make out a face, only the shape of a head that looked wrong, too narrow and elongated. As she stared, the figure tilted its head slowly to the side, then stepped backward into the shadows without a sound. She didn't tell Jason that night, fearing he'd think she was losing her mind. The final entry in the journal was dated 3 days before they were reported missing. There were no long sentences, no analysis, no description. Just one short, chilling line. "It's not a person, and it's inside the house now." After reading the journal, officers were left shaken. What had begun as a straightforward missing persons case had now twisted into something much stranger. The journal was filed as evidence, but parts of the department refused to take it seriously. Others weren't so quick to dismiss it, because deep down, they all felt the same cold truth. Whatever happened to the Mercers wasn't just human. The journal's discovery opened a new, chilling dimension to the Mercer case. What had once seemed like a rare, grisly homicide was starting to resemble something far more disturbing. Most officers hesitated to admit it, but the contents of Lily's final entry haunted them. Still, without solid evidence, the case remained frozen, an unsolved mystery tangled in fear and whispers. That was when Henry Elston stepped forward. Elston was a retired detective who had served in neighbouring Vermont before settling in Ashcroft after his wife passed away. Known for his keen memory and obsessive attention to detail, he had followed the Mercer case quietly from the sidelines. But when he read a redacted version of Lily's journal in a leaked report, something clicked. The figure in the woods, the bloodless remains, the missing time, it all sounded eerily familiar. Back in 1978, Elston had investigated the deaths of 2 hikers found deep in the Green Mountains. Their bodies had been discovered in similar condition, dismembered with surgical precision, completely drained of blood, and buried in a shallow grave. No one had ever been charged. The evidence was sparse, and the case eventually went cold. But now, decades later, the Mercer case seemed like a carbon copy of what he'd seen long ago. Driven by instinct, Elston began to dig. He searched old case files, newspaper clippings, and missing persons reports spanning the last 60 years. What he found was unsettling. There had been at least 6 other unsolved cases in the Northeast with the same pattern. 2 people, never one, never more than 2, vanished near rural or forested areas. When remains were found, they were always mutilated, drained of blood, and hidden in carefully chosen spots. Each case left behind strange details, mentions of figures watching from the trees, unexplainable sounds, dogs going missing days before the incident. The consistency was impossible to ignore. These weren't random murders. They followed a rhythm, like something repeating itself over time, always in secluded places, always unnoticed until it was too late. And every time, investigators came close to something inexplicable. The case was quietly closed or buried under red tape. Elston compiled his findings into a report and brought it to the Ashcroft Police Department, hoping it would spark renewed interest. But the response he received was far colder than he expected. The lead detective refused to discuss the connections. The police chief thanked him politely, then dismissed his theory as interesting but irrelevant. Elston sensed fear, not just skepticism, but the kind of fear that comes when someone knows they're out of their depth. Some of the younger officers showed signs of belief. One of them even confessed privately that a game camera set up in the forest behind the Mercer's house had captured something they couldn't explain. Blurry, tall, and appearing in just a single frame before vanishing. Still, the official stance remained the same. The case was unsolved, the deaths were tragic, and there was no known threat to the public. But Elston knew better. He had seen the pattern. The Mercer case wasn't the beginning of a mystery. It was the latest chapter in a long, horrific story, one that no one wanted to believe was real. Henry Elston refused to let the case die. Though the Ashcroft Police Department had dismissed his report, he continued to investigate alone. He couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had happened to Jason and Lily Mercer was part of something older, darker, and far from over. At night, he pored over old case files, photographs, and coroner's reports. He began to notice the same eerie details repeating over and over: missing time, bloodless bodies, and vague sightings of tall, silent figures. These elements were scattered like breadcrumbs across decades, too consistent to be coincidence. But the more Elston uncovered, the more resistance he faced. Calls to regional law enforcement agencies were met with polite avoidance. Requests for access to archived reports were delayed or outright denied. In some cases, documents had simply vanished from storage with no explanation. It was as if someone, or something, wanted to keep the truth buried. Yet the questions kept piling up. Why were these cases never solved? Why were so many details redacted or left out of public reports? Why had no one ever followed the bloodless trail? Then Elston received an anonymous envelope. Inside was a copy of a confidential medical report from the Mercer autopsies. The contents were disturbing in ways the public had never known. Beyond the complete absence of blood, both bodies had identical surgical incisions at the base of the skull. The cuts were so precise, so clean, that even the medical examiner couldn't determine what tool had been used. What had been removed, however, was unmistakable. Both victims were missing a small section of brain tissue from the prefrontal cortex. The motive behind such a specific removal was a mystery. It wasn't organ harvesting. It wasn't a common mutilation. It was deliberate and exact. This revelation was enough to shake even the most skeptical officers. But when Elston brought the report to the police chief again, he was met with an even colder response. Not only was the case still officially closed, but Elston was warned, gently but firmly, to stop pushing. The chief said the department had no interest in pursuing theories that would damage the community's sense of security. Elston left the office in disbelief. It was no longer about a lack of evidence. Something or someone was actively preventing the truth from being exposed. That night, he spoke to the county coroner off the record. The man admitted something that made Elston's blood run cold. The jar that contained the extracted tissue had been taken from the evidence locker by an unnamed agent from another agency, and the logbook entry had been blacked out the next day. The coroner had never seen anything like it in his entire career. As the story grew darker, Elston found himself isolated. The media had lost interest. The town had moved on. But he couldn't. Not when there was proof that something unnatural had happened. He began to suspect this wasn't just about a killer. This was about something being taken, something essential, something no one could see with the naked eye. And now that he was getting close, it felt like something was watching him too.